Alright, in this video we want to be able to identify and apply the inverse property of addition and the inverse property of multiplication. Okay, those are two different properties, but they're very similar. Now inverse just means, it can mean kind of like opposite, or maybe you can look at it maybe in terms of undoing another operation or another number. And so to use the inverse property of addition, basically they're similar, and you can view them similar, but they're not exactly the same. So it's not like you can just memorize one, uh, and it works for both. When you're using the inverse property of addition, what you want to do is think of another number that you can add to the first number to get to zero. Okay, so for example, to use the inverse property of addition for something like 4, well, you would add the inverse property of addition. You would add -4, and that would give you 0. If you wanted to use the inverse property of addition for a number like -12, well, what do you need to add to -12 to get 0? You would, of course, add +12, and that gives you 0. Now for multiplication, it's a little different. For multiplication, you need to think of, in order to undo some multiplication, you need to think of what you can multiply times that original number to get to 1. Not to get to 0, but to get to 1 for the multiplication. So for example, if I want to multiply something times the whole number 7, okay, what can I multiply times 7 to get 1? Okay, and then it's always going to be actually the reciprocal of the number. So we know that 7 as a fraction is 7 over 1. Okay, so the reciprocal is just you change the numerator and the denominator. So the reciprocal of 7, or 7 over 1, is 1 over 7. And then we can see how when we multiply 7 times 1, we get 7. And we multiply 1 times 7, we get 7. And then our final answer is 1. So in a sense, what can we multiply times 7 to get to 1? Well, it's going to be 1/7. You can do this with fractions. If you have the fraction 2/3, what can you multiply times 2/3 to get 1? Well, you can multiply it times the reciprocal, which is 3 over 2. You want to be careful, okay? You're not multiplying times negative in this case. Okay, it's just the same exact number that you have with the numerator and the denominator, change places. 2 times 3 is 6. 3 times 2 is 6. That gives us 1. If you were to have maybe a negative number and you wanted to find the multiplicative inverse, so let's say you have negative 5 over 6 now. Well, to get the multiplicative inverse of -5 over 6, you're going to multiply times the inverse, 6 over -5. Now, of course, this negative applies to the whole fraction, not just the 5, but for the sake of clarity, we can just do it this way. And you can see that we'll get -30 on top, -30 on the bottom. When you divide a negative by a negative, you get a positive 1. And so that's just the multiplicative, the inverse property of addition. What can you add to get to 0? You're undoing the number in that sense. And the inverse property of multiplication, what can you multiply by to get to 1? And that would be the reciprocal once again. Alright, short video. Hope you guys enjoy watching, and hope you took good notes that you're going to be able to remind yourself of this and learn it and use it in the future. All right.